I'm Dr. Frank Renito, Chief Scientist with the Institute for Digital Transformation. I want to welcome you to Digital Dialogue, where different industry experts discuss digital transformation topics and issues that are of concern to all businesses. Whether you are already a digital enterprise, or on your journey, or still trying to figure out what that all means, we know you'll find something here for you. Remember, as a LinkedIn Live session, this is your opportunity to interact with these experts. Post your comments and questions in chat for a full interactive experience. Welcome to Digital Dialogue.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce a panel, a discussion today. We were supposed to have 4, but one of our panelists, she couldn't make it today. So today I have 3 very interesting people that we can hopefully share dialogue with and give you some ideas. This dialogue is based on like 3 very simple theses that it's around simple thesis that digital transformation, it's much more than just moving from manual processes to automated processes using technology, or elevating IT from the back office to the executive suite and hiring a CIO. Digital transformation is about how your organization responds and adapts to the new business realities that are proliferated because of technology at every level, and how a society responded to that. An example is that a consumer with a smartphone is a new type of consumer. There's a big difference between a direct-to-consumer and a direct-to-digital consumer. A company that is transformed by technology has different expectations from their vendors, partners, and suppliers that one that doesn't have, or have different ones. Competition's changed. 3 people in a garage can build a technology solution that can append an established company with billions of dollars. And that's just kind of like skimming the surface, why large organizations have a hard time managing the challenges that come with digital transformation. So, the subtitle of this conversation is, what is it that large organizations specifically, don't get? And how do we overcome that? How do we help organizations do that? And some of the things that they don't get, for example, is that during this 4th industrial revolution, many of the old mental models companies and company leaders had that they used to assess how to respond are no longer valid. So today's dialogue is about that. Some of the fundamental models that have changed, and how can we think about them. My 3 guests, Mark Gibbs, a well-known technologist and analyst, and a technology gearhead for many, many years, and publishing a column with the name Gearhead. The second is Brett Britton, an attorney who has a significant background in technology, having been one of the early adopters coming out of MIT and then getting into law. And Dr. Richard Manassi, an MD with an MBA and a background in technology, who has spent a while now working in that place where technology and medicine interact. Between the 4 of us, I would say we probably have, 100 years of experience in the space. And what I would like is to have each one of my guests introduce themselves, give their backgrounds, 30-second, 45-second introduction, and then I'll throw some questions for them, and we can start this conversation. So, Mark, let me start with you. Can you please take a few seconds and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark Gibbs. I've been a journalist on and off for the last 2,000 years, and I'm a consultant. I obviously follow the technology world, and as Chuck will attest, I have a few opinions.
Okay. Brent, over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Brent Britton. I'm the oddball sort of software engineer, technology lawyer. As Chuck mentioned, I did a stint at the MIT Media Lab about 1,000,000 years ago, and I've been a lawyer for 29 or 30 years now, focusing on technology law, focusing on future law, focusing on the internet and how it's going to eat our lives, how it's going to eat television, and how technology is going to be the fundamental substrate on which we live our lives for the foreseeable future. So that's me.
And Dr. Manassi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Dr. Richard Manassi. I am the managing director of the Tampa Bay Wave, serial entrepreneur, a couple of tech companies over the course of my career. I've been in technology for about 14 years, and that was the last time I saw a patient as well. It was about 14 years ago. So I've been in that digital sector for time. Outside of my role at the Wave, founder of a couple of different companies, angel investor, heavily involved in the ecosystems of Tampa, as well as Texas and California. Entrepreneur in residence for both USF and the University of Florida and Techstars, and very, very happy to be here and lend some insight from my point of view to this conversation.
And my background is similar to everybody else. I've built and sold a few tech companies, built and managed technology. I advise CIOs and C-suites at companies anywhere from $50 million in revenue to $50 billion in revenue. So my interest is always the practical issues related to what we do and how do we transform. So I'm going to kind of start with Mark and get an introduction and get a perspective on that, because one of the things that we've talked about is that, you know, innovation is a core fundamental function that we need, and now the need of innovation has increased exponentially. The rapid for innovation is changed. The requirements for companies to innovate has changed. So the old mental model of innovation when necessary is outdated, because it relies almost exclusively on being able to some internal people to recognize the need, convince somebody that it's a need, that something that's happening, get approvals. The whole process is antiquated. It's long. It has to get added to a queue for IT to do, among all the other things. My position, my thesis is that you got to start with that process, because it's a slow process and it doesn't match the environment, and that most companies don't have an active technology horizon scanning process and an active innovation management process to make that a reality. So, having said that, what do you think?
Wow. Quite a place to start from. Yeah, the biggest problem is the scale of the company. That the larger the organization you're in, the harder it is to foster innovation, and that's simply a function of it's two factors. One is lethargy, that you're doing things in a certain way. You have staff who've been trained to do those things, and when you ask them to make changes, they have to work those changes in with what they currently do, and you wind up with a lot of resistance. So one of the problems is identifying where the resistance is in your organization and figuring out ways to give more opportunity to people to be creative. But the other part is, where do you find the drive for innovation? And usually within an organization, you're going to find small pockets of people who come up with novel ideas. And you have to have a way of bringing those ideas to the fore and introducing them to the broader perspective of the company. And it's not just the C-suite who have to foster that. It's line management's got to be involved in that. So you have to have it's a terrible word to use, a holistic view of where innovation can be implemented. And then you've got to actually go through the process of figuring out whether you're moving ahead, because you can start innovation, but whether it goes anywhere is a separate matter.
Chuck, if I may, I 100% agree with that approach. If you want to get innovation from your engineering bench to your C-suite and everyone in between, you've got to celebrate innovation in your organization. There's got to be a value recovery process associated with identifying what's been invented today, what's been created today. What did you innovate today? Because you see, we as humans sometimes have a problem standing up and saying, yeah, hey, I did a whole new thing today, because we know that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants and we're all reading, 10 books written by other people and pulling things off the shelf. But I think it's important in the company's culture, if you're truly going to embrace the digital revolution, if you're truly going to transform digitally, everyone in the company who has a good idea as to how the company should be run or how this particular function should be made digital or made more simple or efficient or what have you, should 100% be celebrated. And the successful companies that do this actually reward innovation by giving bonus checks. If your name is on a patent application, you get a bonus check the day that patent application is filed. If your name is on a patent application when it's issued as an actual patent, you get a bonus check when that patent is issued. And one could do the same for copyrights and trademarks and even trade secrets if one were monitoring the process carefully.
Well, so let me move the conversation at a different angle for you, direct the question at you, because one of the challenges that we see is that the value of intellectual property is not necessarily clearly understood, because in the old model, you really can't put, at least there haven't been consistent ways to put IP on the balance sheet, right? And then even when we do that, companies don't realize that the IP process in a digital world is so critical, because it's not like the old way that if you find a new manufacturing process, you put your manufacturing plants together, you spend billions of dollars, did it, yeah, somebody could copy it, but they don't have the billions of dollars to replicate a manufacturing facility. But today, if you created a solution in the market using an algorithm or using a platform and you don't protect it, it takes 3 people in the garage to replicate it and deploy that, and there you go. Your competitive advantage got wiped out. So how do we get the C-suite, our clients, because I know all of us work with C-level executives, how do we get them to see that, and how do we drive them to adopt that mental model that says intellectual property in a digital world is different?
It is. No, it is different, and it's creaking under the weight of the pace at which things are moving today, I admit. But look, I mean, we are in the throes of late-stage capitalism, and the mandate for any good capitalist is to seize every lawful opportunity to increase and maximize shareholder wealth. And intellectual property provides a conduit for maximizing shareholder wealth. It just does. If you've invented something, you get a patent, you can prevent other people from practicing that invention, effectively shutting down competition for 20 years if you do it right. And the same with trademarks and copyrights and trade secrets. So intellectual property is an opportunity for good entrepreneurs, good C-suite leaders to actually fatten their asset base. Because if somebody in your company invents something, you've got the invention, that's great. But now you have the patent, which you can get almost, effectively for free. As long as you were the first to invent the thing and the first to get the patent on file, you've created an entire other asset class in your company that adds value to the company. Investors like it, buyers like it. Everybody likes a big intellectual property portfolio. So.
There's a but to this, though, and
there's a but to everything, Mark.
Well, you obviously like big butts.
I cannot lie.
What you're talking about is absolutely valid, except for the fact that that's essentially the low-hanging fruit of innovation. That if you're looking for those large-scale things, if you've got intellectual property, it's almost undeniable the value of that. But when you're talking about digital transformation, a lot of it has to happen down. If you're going to really, spread it through the company, it's got to happen down at I hate the phrase grassroots level. It's got to be the stuff. You've got to encourage people to think about opportunity and improvement. I many years ago, I used to work for Ford's, and one of the things they had in that gigantic assembly line producing tractors, and they had essentially they promoted an innovation competition or opportunity for the staff. And one of the janitors came up with the realization that they had these lines throughout the factory, the yellow lines to warn you where you were crossing into a dangerous area. And he put into the suggestion box the idea that you could see the lines for half a mile. Well, paint them thinner. And they basically reduced the cost of just painting these lines, by half. But that came from a janitor. And that's what, when you're talking about innovation in a company, it can't just be up in the C-suite. You want it to come from the bottom. And I always thought that was just such a great example of somebody coming up with a tremendous idea.
So
just with respect to the question on the screen from Dr. Frank, does the company own the patent if it's done on company time? Generally, yes. If you're working within the scope of your employment, you're inventing something, your company owns it. You have to be named as the person who did the inventing on the patent, but yeah, the company pretty much owns everything you do.
So it's interesting though. Let's move this into Dr. Manasseh's world, because think about it. If you hear our conversation, our focus right now is, hey, the C-suite's got to do that. The environment has to allow this. The accountants need to know how to account for it. But you look at the healthcare space, and you and I, just like everybody else, worked on a couple of things over the years together. I have to tell you, I mean, my view of the healthcare space, if you want to describe a mess, just point them to the healthcare system. It's a mess. There's no other way to describe it. So how do you take it? I mean, because you've been on both sides, you've been an MD, you get enough problems keeping up with the medical technology advancements, let alone the things that you have to do to digitally transform the business of healthcare. And then if you have the complexity of, we're not talking about losing a few $1 million if we screw up, we're talking about killing a few thousand people, right? That's a completely different metric for the controls, that need for innovation. So you've been there, you've made investments in medical technology, but in my view and what I've experienced, it is nearly impossible to bring to market an MVP, because a minimally viable product, because the regulations, all the things that you got to do. So how can healthcare companies transition to a digitally enabled world, let alone completely transform, right? I mean, how do we find the Amazon for healthcare and the Google for healthcare? Because Dr. Google is a terrible MD, but a lot of people go ask advice, right? How do we do that? How does a digital transformation, how do you read that, being on both sides, an MD and a guy that lives in this space?
Okay. You asked me a bunch of questions. I'll try to chip away at it, kind of one piece at a time. First, when it comes to the Amazon or Google of healthcare, I don't think that's ever going to exist. Our healthcare system here in the U.S. is just far too fractured. There's too many hands in the pot, so to speak, when it comes to the dollars. And here in the United States, healthcare is a business. Let's make sure everyone understands that. It is not like other countries where healthcare is a right. It is 100% a business here. I don't agree with it, but it is what it is. So when I'm looking at it from a large organization or corporation perspective, the differing stakeholders within the organization all have to do different things. So it's the CEO's job and the C-suite's job to set up an environment that is open and can facilitate change, and where the workers understand that their voices are heard and the small things that can make a big difference are actually being listened to. Any healthcare organization can make an impact, quote unquote, so to speak, by putting in like Alexa in a in a hospital room, which I've seen so many times. Like, what value is that really to the patient population versus a great company that, for example, designs a new sort of surgical needle to allow for better outcomes in surgeries, right? So when you think about it from a core problem perspective and really changing it, it has to come from the top to foster the innovation. The people, even at the ground level, need to be empowered to be able to speak up at the issues that are in front of them and point to inefficiencies. And then there has to be pathways in place from, whether it's contracting, legal, whatever that is, to help facilitate easy interactions with regards to external companies and vendors that can show that change in outcomes and show that change in downstream healthcare servicing, for lack of a better term. One of the things that I've seen kind of work historically is actually having an external department within the hospital whose job is solely to go out and find great healthcare vendors and great startups that can then be brought in to solve problems for the healthcare system too. Only relying on the internal teams to point out inefficiencies and drive change, I don't think that really works without having it hand in hand with an external group whose job is solely to go see what's best out there. Because if you think at it from the viewpoint of the average physician or nurse at a large hospital, they don't even have time to know what's out on the market, what's impactful, what's coming out of a Stanford or an MIT or Duke or wherever, where there's this differing quality of care because of leveraging technology. And you can't expect everything come from within. There has to be sort of that blended model when it comes to engagement. And then on the startup side, and I'll address this very quickly, for a startup to break into a large health system or a hospital organization, you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to have your SOC 2. You have to know all of the different nuances that a hospital and a large enterprise opportunity will demand of you, and find a way to cut your teeth, perhaps in an academic medical center, leveraging SBIR or STTR funding to do your clinical research validation before thinking that I'm going to go and roll this out to Mass General and Stanford and Texas Medical Center's affiliates, and the list goes on. I think that's something that I've seen a lot of startups not really understand, is you have to walk before you can run. But if you land the right 2, 3, 4, 5 hospitals, essentially your revenue is going to take you to unicorn status very quickly.
Wow, I got to tell you, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. It's insane healthcare right now. I mean, again, we are in the throes of late stage capitalism in the United States, where healthcare is a for-profit business. The onus is on all of us to simply make it, since we're not going to socialize it, apparently, the onus is on all of us to make it better, stronger, faster, more efficient, more cost effective, less costly to the patient. And digital transformation is obviously a huge on-ramp to getting to a place where healthcare can hopefully eventually cost less. But I got to bring up something that we haven't brought up in this conversation yet, which deals with healthcare and the entire milieu of digital transformation, which is AI. I've been practicing law for 29 years. I'm really good at it. I'm a good negotiator. I'm a good contract draftsperson. But I honestly expect in about, let me check my notes. 5 minutes, that AI is going to be able to do those things better than me. I mean, the fact that, an AI can look at your Zoom video and detect your galvanic skin response and your blood pressure makes them a pretty good negotiator. The fact that an AI can read every contract that's ever been written and write the best one and the optimal one for the particular situation is going to put me out of business. Now, I don't think AI is going to put doctors out of business anytime soon. But I think anyone whose business is based on this notion that I win because I have human intuition is doomed to fail, because human intuition can be modeled and substituted by brute force AI methodology, if nothing else. So
oh boy, this is going to be an interesting conversation. I kind of knew when I put the 4 of us together, but all right. So there, somebody, ChatGPT is the latest and greatest. Everybody talks about that, right? And I heard a very funny description of it. Somebody said it's autocorrect on steroids. And in a way, it's true. Just like what you said, it's true. There's some things that it can do, but in the end, how does it change? It relies on past history to determine what's going to come next.
Sure.
It doesn't create, right? It doesn't, and somebody needs to ask the right question in order to get the right answer, right? Because even
it's a toddler. Yes, it's a toddler right now, and it's struggling, and occasionally it's going to skin its knee. But give it 5 minutes.
It's no different from at the moment from asking an intelligent child a question. It can only be based on what it knows. One of the descriptions I like of Chat GPT is that it's a stochastic parrot, and as funny as that is, it actually isn't tremendously different from the way that our brains function anyway. The big problem with AI at the moment is a lack of temporal awareness, a lack of immediate learning, although all of those things are being addressed. And so you will find Brent's absolutely right. Within 3 to 5 years, the impact of AI on almost everything we do in business is going to be staggering. And we're going to see some major transformations in employment because of AI.
I agree. I think we need to honestly begin to consider what civilization looks like when most people don't have a job.
We should, but we won't.
But I'll tell you, well, we should, but we won't. But I'll tell you, there are some things that AI can't replace. Okay. I mean, right now, the surgical robot is no replacement for an actual human surgeon. Right, Richard? I mean, right now, you guys were talking about cooking earlier, and it occurred to me that ain't no AI going to be cooking like y'all. Okay, like, I mean, you guys, you're talking about your recipes and your sauces and stuff, and it's like, there's a lot of stuff that's not going to be owned by the digital world, but most of it will. And I'm sorry, but there's just not going to be a lot of need for a lot of human brains in the working world soon.
So it's interesting because when I started World Watch Plus with my partner Eric Beach, and we're trying to figure out the technology to use. When we started that, it was, we're gonna do some basic labels, some data extraction, and go from there. And eventually, we built a significant AI structure that allowed us to make meaningful decisions about risk. 20,000 sources from around the world, multiple languages, read the internet basically. And if you were a bad person, we would be able to flag that for, let's just say, certain 3-letter agencies and background screening companies and so on and so forth. But what we clearly replaced using the automation and the AI was the human being that sat there and screened that and attach labels and extracted the data to generate a report. In the end, we couldn't assess the risk itself because the risk was unique to every company. And I guess every time I hear these conversations, my mind goes to, well, AI is just another tool, right? It's in the hands of who does it. And Mark's shaking his head. It's not another tool.
Shaking my head too.
All right, tell me why it's not another tool.
Because it strikes at the heart of what we think of being human creativity. The fact that you can use a system like Midjourney and give it a description of a scene, and it will produce a picture of that scene. Something that until this latest round of AI came along, you would have said only humans can do that, and it can do that. It can do that kind of stuff at a level of specificity that is truly staggering. I want 3 dancing unicorns wrapped with rainbows, shot on this particular Nikon camera on this particular film with studio lighting. I mean, that's a level of insight into description that we never had.
And also give me a fun plot that lasts 27 minutes before I have to go to sleep, and give me a twist at the end that freaks me out. I mean, it's coming. This is happening. I mean, the generative AI today. Now, look, there are all kinds of intellectual property issues, okay? Because in order to create a competent generative AI engine, you have to look at all the art or all the literature or whatever it is, and there's some copying going on there. There is. But I mean, the fact that you can, write me a story about a unicorn and a castle and a princess, and you get it in 10 seconds. I mean, we're on the verge of AI creativity, and we have never seen that before. We've been waiting for it. All of us have been waiting for it for 40 or 50 years, but it's doing it now. Okay. And it's clumsy and it's stumbling and it's skinning its knees, but it's going to run before long.
Well, I don't think anybody's arguing that, but in the end though, it's funny. You said that about Richard's world, right? About a doctor can be replaced by a robot, but there is let's face it, there's a fundamental difference between bits and atoms, right? So we can always digitally transform and change bits, but in order to digitally transform and change atoms, you actually need a lot more, right? And
You
so
need
maybe the right question is, what's the difference then between automation and transformation, right? Is the fact that I found a way to make and I'll go to Richard about this. So Doc, we've talked about, example, the AI that reads radiology scans, right?
Mhm.
And is the fact that I created a machine that can read radiology scans faster than a human and can detect visual abnormalities better than the human eye, is that digital transformation, or is it just the application of automation and technology to help the guy that at the end's got to decide what to do with that?
So I don't know if they're mutually exclusive. I think they're both things, right? I think that it is a transformation at a very high level because it's something incrementally better, right? I expect if I'm going to define digital transformation, I want to see a 10x return based on what we see. And I think that that's happening right now in the world of radiology. And it's actually already trickling down to medical students as they graduate. They are stepping away from the radiology practice and world because they can read the tea leaves. They understand that how radiologists even practice is shifting dramatically. Leveraging these tools is going to shape the future of not just the profession of radiology as a whole. And I think it's going to greatly diminish the need from a volume standpoint of radiologists over time. I think we're seeing great companies as well already start to do this at scale. Pathology Watch is a really fast-moving company based out of Utah that I really like, that plays in this world of AI against images and against in healthcare as a whole. But I don't think the two components of automation and transformation are mutually exclusive. I think that they're one and the same, and you can use automation to have a significant transformation within an organization.
So you're not going to get a disagreement from me, right? I've always said that or is a fool's choice. It's not this or that. The better way is this and that, and figure out the right balance.
And Chuck, if I may, this area of digital transformation is perhaps one of the most delicate, right? Because we can talk about replacing your lawyer with an AI and like, what's the downside? Oh, the contract is wrong or something like that. And it may be worth millions of dollars, but probably nobody dies. And the fact is the digital transformation from human doctors, human surgeons, human radiologists into AI-driven robotics, where humans are standing by to make sure nothing goes wrong, as opposed to the active medical practitioner, is a long on-ramp, right? Like, so much testing, so much needs to be required before we are able to give up the practice of medicine to the digital transformation completely, right? I mean, humans, I claim that humans are going to be cooking and practicing medicine for a long time before the robots take over.
I think you're going to find humans being displaced much faster than you might believe, because
I believe that's true in every sector. I believe that. Now, all I'm saying is medicine is a unique,
right, and
with high risk.
I think medicine is just as vulnerable to sweeping change as any other field of human activity, because if you think about the majority of practical medicine, it's procedural. And that's AI can deal with that and will deal with it. And somebody mentioned Dr. Frank Granito said, what did he say? He had a question about the gamification of work. Whether will that be the fine motor skill portion of AI and robotics? And the answer is, well, gamification is kind of a silly idea. I've always thought, what you're talking about is making work more interesting. Gamification is adding trivia. And I think that you're going to find that there are so many aspects of the nature of work that will evolve very rapidly when you're partnering with an AI or you're being replaced by an AI, that it's not going to be, it's definitely not business as usual.
Well, Pat, Patty has an interesting comment. It says displace, not replace, right? And maybe to bring it back to some of the more mundane aspects of digital transformation, we all spend and I know I've spent hours probably with both of you and some of you at the same time talking about these big picture ideas, these big paths, but on a daily basis. So now we're sitting here saying, wait a minute. So how do I get a company that doesn't necessarily understand? And when I say a company, it is a company is the collection of the people that lead it, right? Because there's all these, a company is not a person. So how do we go from the macro to the micro level, and how do we help the companies understand which models need to change, right? So again, a good example is a classic return on invested capital model, right? Most companies have finally caught up to the idea that it's a return on invested capital model might be a little more important than your day-to-day EBITDA profitability model. And it was interesting because how do we make that happen? I give you an example. I had a conversation with a CIO of a couple of $1 billion in revenue company, and he was complaining that they got all these ideas and they even filed some patents and they did all that stuff, and the company is not doing anything about it. And I asked him, said, how much free cash flow does the company have? Because, they're not going to fund your ideas out of their reserve. And he didn't know what free cash flow was. So that just made me cringe, right? Because now we have somebody who's supposed to drive that, didn't understand that. By the same token, I have a conversation with a CEO client of mine who calls me and says, what the hell does this thing mean? Because in the end, he doesn't have the time. And it was funny, he never actually used a smartphone the way I gave him a half a dozen apps, and it was like, well, I don't use that for that. My assistant takes care of that. How do we now make that bridge when a consumer is completely transformed, but the leadership of the organization doesn't understand? We have some mundane things we got to do today.
We replaced the CEO with an AI. That's the answer.
Or we give the CEO an AI assistant / secretary who can use those apps for him or her. So in his or her antiquated posture, they don't have
Actually, that wouldn't work though, because you're still going to have the friction of the CEO who doesn't get it. You can drag him screaming and kicking into the 21st century, but he's still going to be screaming and kicking.
The worst thing you can hear from the C-suite is, that's not the way we do it around here.
Yes.
I get that. I just want to comment that Dr. Frank is saying you can't automate creativity. And I'm sorry, Dr. Frank, but I disagree.
Yeah,
I think you can automate creativity and intuition and innovation. And I think you can, or at least simulate it. I don't know that AI is ever going to work the way the human brain does. It's a pretty fascinating organ, but it can simulate it quite well. I mean, it's scary how close we're getting, and it's going to come way sooner than we think.
Well, here's something that I want to kind of bring up is we might be getting closer, but leveraging AI and these differing tools at a large scale level, I don't think we're going to come close to that for a long time. And the reason why is generational, unfortunately. Look at the average age of a CEO of Fortune 1000 company. They're a little bit more gray than even any of us here. And there's a technological divide when it comes to people of a certain age, whether we want to admit it or not, that even understands things that are being thrown around here that the younger kids are, growing up around since they're 10, 11, 12 years old.
Sure.
The children in particular, the ones that are, sub 25 or so, they grew up in a very, very different world. And I'm 40 years old, so I kind of straddled that line. I remember dial-up. I was there in the ages of dial-up. And then I really went to college and thought, holy cow, T1, like, what is this? Right. And then now it's a completely different world altogether. And, all these things are faster even on our phone. So I think that the downstream leverage of those technologies, we're probably looking at, 10 to 25 years or so until we see widespread adoption. I think the larger, especially like the financial firms in particular, I think will leverage it much faster than your more traditional business models like logistics, which is still fumbling their way through it, like healthcare, just simply because the mentality of most executives and leadership is very, very different.
So let me give you a perspective, because I think we have a gap in other places too, right? And so I work with the University of Tampa Entrepreneurship Center. I dragged all of you at one point or another in to speak to students, do things. And it always fascinates me when the younger generation, the 18 to 24-year-olds, will show up one of our events to talk about their idea, and they will talk about, I'm going to build an app to do all these things, and it's clearly they have no idea what happens behind the UI.
Mhm.
They have no idea what is required to be built behind the screen that they have to actually bring that innovation to market.
But they do have the right pronouns.
Oh yeah, they do, right? So the other gap that we have is now this gap between, everybody walks around and says, well, there should be an app for that. And there's a collision between bits and atoms worlds, right? Because, and I give you the example, there was one group of kids that said, well, we're going to replace all the toll booths with this app we're building. And I said, how do you get paid? How does the money move? I had no clue, no idea. How do these toll gates work? What is the technology behind it? Not a clue. So now we have the C-suite's got a gap because they don't deal with it. The younger people deal with it, but they don't know what it needs to take to build something.
That's easier, Chuck. That's an easier problem to solve than the C-suite, because you and I, as you well know, we can take a bunch of college undergrads with good ideas and we can train them for 60 to 90 days and teach them the fundamentals of business, the fundamentals of startup. We can teach them what an ROI is, what market validation is, and all the things they need to do to test whether their idea is worth pursuing or not. Whereas the C-suite, that's like, well, that's not the way we do it around here. Sometimes those people aren't so amenable to having their minds changed.
So it's also digital transformation. It's also a cultural transformation.
It is, and you would think entrepreneurship would be in the drinking water by now, but it's not. As I'm sure Dr. Manassi well knows, it's something you need to train people how to do every single time. And it's the generation doesn't learn from the previous one. Like, hey, I have this great idea. I want to do the thing and make the world a better place. Great. Here's the stuff you have to do to prove that you have a viable business. Turns out, and so yeah, but the good news is there's still a ton of good ideas coming from human brains at the moment, and we should be encouraging those people to pursue those ideas because they're all about digital transformation for the most part. I mean, Chuck, you and I see hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of pitches per year, and most of them are about digital transformation, right?
Yeah,
right. Most of them are about sneakernet moving online, and we see some salt of the earth, real world stuff. But for the most part, these kids today, they want to write their apps, and if they don't understand how UI versus server works, they don't understand a business model, they don't understand ROI or whatnot, we can train them in that stuff. We can find them a technical co-founder. If they have a good concept, we can move them down the path, and that's what you guys at Wave do every day, right, Dr. Manassi?
Yeah, one more thing that I'll say is this: is like, their ideas, many times, the ideas that sound crazy are the ones that end up changing the world. Right?
Absolutely.
By
definition. No, absolutely. If you're not saying something crazy, you're just being dull, for God's sakes. That's the worst sin as far as I'm concerned. Don't.
Yeah, and I would say there ain't one person on this call that we label as dull. So at any point. So let me do this. I know we're supposed to run for 45 minutes, and we are at the 45-minute mark because we started at 12:30, right? So. Unlike each of you, because we can go on. We've done this where we can end up talking for hours, add a scotch and a cigar in the mix, and the next thing you know, it's 5 hours later. So let's do this. I mean, you each have a very unique perspective on this digital transformation, and I would like to kind of get your closing thoughts on, here you are from your seat, from your perch. What's the message that you would give to our peers, clients that we don't talk to directly, the people that are struggling trying to figure this out? What would be the thought that you give? What would be your closing comment on digital transformation?
Sure, I'll start here. Embrace risk as best as you can. Also, bring people around who know what they're doing. I think this is critically important. We see this thing in healthcare. I'm just going back maybe 10 years ago. Whenever I would watch a hospital or a health system launch an innovation group, and I would look at who was on the innovation team, I would want to just pull my hair out, because it became very, very obvious what they did is they gathered people and they said, okay, well, we want to launch something around digital innovation and strategy. Raise your hand if you want to be a part of this. Okay, who has that longest tenure? Awesome. You're one of our heads of innovation. And that's starting to cycle out because, the better people continue to stay on, and then people, as they get worse and recognized at not being good at what they do, get cycled out. But in general, I would say to drive digital transformation, really embrace risk, understand what the downstream ROI is, when it's going to actually provide fruit to the organization, and then bring people around who've been there, done that, that can leverage best practices to get you from A to B. Don't go straight. That doesn't mean go straight to Amazon or go straight to Google, but that does mean you look at who has worked, for example, let's say in health, at other hospital systems that have brought in transformations that have helped the patient population in a significant way. Bring them over to your organization and replicate it as fast as you can, because it's a damn shame that in Mississippi, healthcare is completely terrible compared to New York or California. And that's something that I still can't believe it. To this day, no one seems to be fixing or care about.
I'm happy to go next if you don't mind, Chuck. I 100% agree with that analysis, and I would simply add to it that, look, organizations, especially ones that have been around and calcified for a while, really need to adopt the entrepreneurial sort of methodology, which is try, fail, pivot, right? Like there's so much politics inside of a large, complex organization, especially a hospital, especially one with a board, associated with, well, Joe had this idea, so we're going to execute on Joe's idea and we're going to push it until it works or not, and maybe there'll be ROI and maybe there won't. But all it takes is a dedicated group of innovators who can try something, see if it works, see if patients like it, see if doctors like it, see if it has an ROI. If it doesn't, figure out what's wrong with it and pivot and turn a little bit and try it again over and over and over again until you find the new thing. So yes, absolutely, embrace the risk, but be sane about it. Just try the thing. And look, entrepreneurship, innovation, digital transformation is effectively a scientific experiment. It's not a foregone conclusion. Nobody knows necessarily what's going to work or what's going to be the next big thing. You have to test it out. You have to see if it works. You have to see if people want it, see if people care about it, see if people will pay for it, and then determine whether it's a good idea to pursue in your business or not. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, over to you, Mark.
Okay, I agree with everything that was just said. You have to embrace risk. You have to, I think a very important factor is you've got to be dissatisfied. You've got to keep looking for what could be improved and where is it that we slow down and where are we not keeping pace with the marketplace. And one of the other things is your organization has to have internal incentives. There has to be a reason for doing this. And those incentives can be financial. They can be just job satisfaction. But you've got to identify what they are and promote that to the people who are in the position to come up with novel strategies.
So, ditto, right? No disagreement. The only thing I would add is, if you're in the C-suite, don't confuse IT and technology with digital, because IT and technology can be a tool to improve, can bring automation, but that doesn't bring transformation by default. And the other point that I would say is, if your customers are transforming digitally and you're not, you're going to have a problem. So learn and start from that. So with that, hopefully, I know I always enjoy these conversations in private. It's the first time we've done one of these in public. Thank you to the three of you for agreeing to expose these conversations to a wider audience than just the two of us or three of us, or how we do that. I appreciate the audience, anybody that joined from LinkedIn. I appreciate your tolerance of our kind of winding conversation, and hopefully you found it interesting and educational. And the Institute runs this on a regular basis. I know Frank is going to ask me to do another one sometime this year, but we look forward to seeing you guys again. And with that, thank you very much, and we'll close this session.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure.
Thank you for joining our digital dialogue. Be sure to join our next digital dialogue on the first and third Tuesdays of every month.